Hi, this is Paul at Kiln Pro. Today we're going to talk about kiln problems. If you've had a kiln for a while, you know that every once in a while your kiln has a bad day. So there are a few things that you can check on your own before you have to call in a technician. We're going to go through those. We'll keep it simple, easy, and fast. All right, issue number one, no power to the controller. It's completely blank. A couple of things that you can do. First, you can check to make sure that the plug is firmly seated into the outlet. Then you can go to the breaker box and check to make sure that the breaker is in the on position. Even if it's in the on position, sometimes flipping it off and flipping it back on will get it firmly seated again. Another thing that you can check is the fuse and the fuse holder if the controller box has one. Sometimes those fuses blow and you don't get anything on the controller. It's just as simple as replacing the fuse. Another thing that you can do to make sure that the problem is with the kiln and not with the outlet is to try to plug another appliance into the outlet and see if it works. All right, issue number two, you have slow or uneven heating in your kiln. There are a few things that you can check on. First, you're going to turn the power off. And then the first thing we're going to do is check the relays. Now this kiln has 3 relays, they're right here. And I've replaced them once in the kiln, so that was a pretty easy thing to do. It's the 3 black boxes that you see right here with all the wires going to them. A quick tip when you're replacing relays, take a picture of how they look before you start disconnecting the wires so that you know where those wires go back. So relays can go out, they're mechanical relays, and you should just replace them every 2 to 5 years depending on how often you use your kiln, just as a good measure. You don't want a relay to stick in the closed position and have a runaway kiln where it just heats and heats and heats and won't turn off. Another thing that you can check that might be worn out is your elements. This kiln is a deep ceramic kiln, so it has lots of elements. It actually has 3 banks of elements that are all controlled by separate thermocouples on this particular kiln. So one thing that you can do is something that's called a paper test. Take little strips of paper and wedge them into the coils and the elements and do it 1 piece of paper for each element. And then run the kiln up to about 300 degrees, turn it off, cut the power off, and then open the kiln up and take a look at those slips of paper and see if they're all equally charred. If there's some slip of paper that don't have any char marks on them, those elements aren't working, so they probably need to be replaced. Another issue you might have with your kiln, which we touched on earlier, is element wear. Elements do a really good job of heating your kiln, but they wear out because they get old. So if you have a kiln that's several years old and you use it all the time, maybe if it's a ceramic kiln like this that does come 10 firings all the time, those elements are gonna get tired and stop working, so you need to replace them. One thing that you can do to check is that paper test that I mentioned earlier. I always replace all the elements at one time because they've all had the same amount of wear. And if one breaks, then the others are bound to follow soon. Another thing that you can do if you're more electrically inclined is to test the elements with a multimeter and see if there's continuity throughout the entire element. And you can do that by going to the element connections in your controller box and making sure that your breaker is off or your kiln is unplugged, and then use a multimeter to see if there's current running through the element. If you don't get a current, that means that there's a break somewhere. You might not be able to see it, but it's there, so the elements need to be replaced. All right, last thing that we're gonna cover with kiln problems with your brick. If you see little cracks in your brick, please don't panic, they're completely normal. Kiln brick expands and contracts every time you fire the kiln, and so little hairline cracks are gonna develop, and they're completely normal. You can see that my kiln lid has some cracks right here. There's another one that goes right here. I'm not worried about that at all because nothing's gonna happen with that. That's just completely normal. If you have larger cracks that are maybe more than 1/4 of an inch, maybe 1/8 of an inch, you might wanna try to repair those with kiln repair cement, and that will prevent them from getting larger. If you have a crumbling brick, it's really hard to repair that, but you can try, and if that doesn't work, then you might have to replace a brick or 2. When you have to replace bricks in a kiln, especially a kiln that's built like this, you probably want to call in a repair person to do that because it's a fairly involved process. One more thing that we should cover is relays. We talked about relays earlier and how you can check them and how they need to be replaced every once in a while. There are 2 different types of relays, well, 3 different types. There's a regular mechanical relay, And then there's the mercury relay, which isn't used very much anymore because they do contain mercury, which is a toxic substance. And then the new relay is the solid state relay, and that's what you see most often when you upgrade your relays. This kiln has regular mechanical relays, and when I start the kiln, it's going to go through a process where it checks all the relays, and you hear that clicking sound. You're going to hear that clicking sound the entire time the kiln is on if it has mechanical relays. If your kiln always clicks and all of a sudden it's not heating and it doesn't click anymore, the relays are gone. They need to be replaced. If you have solid state relays, not going to be a problem because solid state relays just don't wear out. They're going to last longer than the kiln. So there you go, the most common kiln problems that you might have and the easy ways to check on them before they get too serious. Remember, keep an eye on your cords, check your elements often, remember how old your relays are if they're regular mechanical relays, and check that thermocouple every once in a while. If you have a touch screen controller, one thing you might try is to recalibrate the touch screen or get a software or a firmware update. That usually solves some problems with touch screens. And remember, if these things don't work out and you can't figure out what's wrong with your kiln, call a kiln technician. That's what they're there for. We have a kiln repair directory on our website, so you can reference that. It's listed by state, and they should be able to help you out. You can call us as well, but if we're trying to diagnose a problem over the phone and it's something that's complicated, it's not really going to be very easy for us if we can't see what's going on. So call that kiln technician and get them to come in and take a look. Happy firing.